And then you need to collect relevant information. And when we're looking at information, there's 3 properties of data that you need to look at if you want to use it. The first one is validity. And validity simply says, are you measuring what you thought you were measuring? And when we talk again, when we're dealing with latent variables, when we're not measuring them directly, we need to make sure is, are the measures that we're using, so we talked earlier about returns, filling out a survey, repeat purchases as indicators of satisfaction, those seem valid. That's what we call face validity. If I also included whether or not they buy other products, does that relate to satisfaction? So that's one of the issues of validity. And there is a temptation to focus on things that are measurable rather than things that are valid. And we still have this. In the early days with e-commerce, internet marketing, it was all about the number of clicks that you got, because clicks meant eyeballs. And we really weren't interested in how many clicks we got. We were interested in how much we sold, right? But it's hard to measure. It's hard to measure what customers are doing once they're on the site, but it's really easy to measure the clicks. So we measure that as opposed to trying to look at what are the drivers of the purchase that would be more important to measure. For example, is anybody here, and I do this, get on the scale in the morning? Yeah. After McDonald's, I always get on the scale because those bonus fries in the bottom of the bag that I've heard about but never experienced personally because I would never go there. How do you know about bonus fries if you've never been to McDonald's? Anyways, you get on the scale. What are you measuring? Weight. What is weight? What is it that you want to measure? Progress towards? Either or. So you want to measure how much of you there is, right? And ideally, there's less of me today than there was yesterday. When I am on the scale, I'm measuring weight. What is weight? Any physicists in the room? Yeah, weight is mass times acceleration. And so we want to measure our mass, but what we're really measuring is weight, which is mass times acceleration. Now, normally, if you're on Earth, that's not that big of a deal because gravity is pretty much the same all over the Earth. Although, if you really wanted to go good on your diet, you'd weigh yourself on the top of Mount Everest because you would weigh a little bit less on the top of Mount Everest than you would if you measured yourself at sea level. And certainly, if you stepped on a scale on the moon, you would look like a hero. Look at me. I can have double fries and a supersized Slurpee now. But the point is, I'm trying to measure mass, and just to understand what I'm really measuring is mass as is affected by the Earth's gravitational field. In most cases, that doesn't make a difference, but and that's a very good proxy for it. The next issue in data is reliability. So the first issue is validity. Are you measuring what you think you measure? The next one is reliability, which is your measuring process good? So if you repeat the measure time after time, will you get the same result? Now, I don't know if you do this, but when I get on the scale in the morning, I do that, and then I do, because I know if I stand right there, I can get a half a pound less. Right? You ever done that? Or try it again. You lie. Oh, that's much better, right? So that's you're dealing with reliability, is if I don't get the exact same reading every time I step on the scale, there's an issue with reliability. We talked about uncertainty in data. Reliability is one of those uncertainties. So in my case, it rarely varies more than a pound or two either way. And I always go with the one that works best for me. But it's the idea that if it was exactly the same every time, that would be reliable. If you get different measures with different times, then you have an issue. Can you trust the data? And then the last one is generalizability. And this means, can we take the results of our sample and apply what we've learned to the general population? So in our survey, we found that people prefer blue over red. Does that mean that people prefer blue over red? And the issue with generalizability is, in order to say yes, you need a probability sample. and which means that there's a known chance of being in the population. A lot of times it's a random sample, could be a stratified random sample. There are times when we use samples other than probability samples, largely because we can't. Some of the most common ones are convenience samples. If anybody's ever done one of those Facebook polls, that's a convenience sample. You've ever gone to a store and had somebody at the front door greet you with a clipboard and ask you some questions? That's called a mall intercept. That's a probability sample, or a convenience sample is I can only sample people who were, and one of the issues with data reliability, I had this happen. Many years ago, my daughter was going to school at a high school across from Stonestown Mall. And one day she came home from school just loaded with candy. And as I said, what's going on here? She said, well, Dad, you're in marketing, so you'd appreciate this. I was at the mall, and somebody said that if I gave them some opinions on makeup, they'd give me $50. So I went in, and they did the thing, and they gave me $50, and that was pretty cool. And then when I left, they said, by the way, if anybody calls, tell them that you're 35 years old and you're married. Because obviously the researcher was expected to get women who are 35 and married, and chose to get somebody wearing a high schooler because that was convenient. But those are some of the issues in data. Oh, the other kind of sample, I just include that because that's a fun one. Snowball sample. And a snowball sample is used in situations where you don't know who's in the population, the size of the population. And the way that a snowball sample works is, rather than randomly selecting from the group, is you start with somebody that you know is in the population, and then you ask them for referrals. And they can probably point you to other people in the population, and then when you start getting the same names over and over again, the sample is probably complete. We use this methodology when we were doing research trying to look at what we were working with a financial services industry, and they were looking at what are the key issues that the visionaries in the industry see facing us 5 years from now. So we needed to sample people who were considered to be visionaries. Where do you get a list of visionaries so that you can... So the way we did is we started out with the trade group that was sponsoring the research and says, give us a seed, give us some names of people that you think are visionary. And then when we talked to those people, we asked them, in your opinion, who else is visionary? And then when we started getting the same names again, we felt that we had got a sampling of the population. So one of the issues, again, in research is bias, and this is when we talked about human beings are biased in the brain. It's not good or bad. It just means it's different than what you expected in some way. Similarly, numeric bias just means that it's something other than a normal distribution. Okay, validity. Another issue in bias is the questionnaire design. And this is, one, the language needs to be appropriate to the audience. And there's a saying, I used to be in sales, there's a saying that sales happens in the language of the customer. Similarly, research happens in the language of the subject, of the prospect. So avoid words that have specific meanings in your industry that might not be the same with everybody else. For example, my wife was working many years ago, everything happened many years ago, where she was working with a standardized patient program helping train doctors. And one of the scenarios is they were doing an interview with her, and the doctor asked her what her diet was. And she said, "Are you calling me fat?" Because what does diet mean? Diet, to the normal person, a diet is a weight loss program, right? But to a doctor, a diet is what is your nutritional intake. So the point is that's an issue of language, that if I ask the person on the street what your diet is, are you calling me fat? And if I'm talking to a colleague, diet, we all understand what that means. So it's important when you're setting up the questions that you're using language that is understood by your customers and is not not confusing. Double-barreled questions, those are where you ask two questions in the same question. A lot of times those are done in pseudo-research. So, you know, which candidate do you prefer, Trump or Clinton, based on their attitude towards gun control? Well, wait a minute, there's two questions there. How do you answer that? Do I answer based on my attitude to the candidate, or do I ask based on the candidate's attitude towards gun control? And how would the researcher know which one you're talking about? Variations on this theme is framing, and this is when we're doing pseudo-research. This is where you ask a question in a way that leads people towards a specific answer or leads people to think in a certain way. This relates to the psychological principle of priming, where if you talk about something and that's fresh in people's minds, that will influence what's happening. And I don't know if I have a sample question here. Nope, I don't. So let me give you an example. Who here believes that it is the responsibility of a city to take care of the homeless? Okay, good. Who here would support a $50 million tax in order to create another bureaucracy to provide social services? Okay, same question. Right? So if I was for it, I might frame the question that looks at helping the helpless. And if I was against that, I would frame the question in a way that emphasizes the tax, the financial consequences. But the point is, those kinds of questions are not designed to get information. Those are designed to get you to think the way I want you to think.